All right, y'all, so this is the Unit 9A test review over finding solutions. So number 1 says label the following as linear, quadratic, or neither. Now, if you don't know how to recognize these, you can type these in the calculator. Just a quick recap, linear obviously looks like a straight line, quadratic is going to look like a parabola, and then neither is going to be neither one of those. So if you look at A, you notice this is equal to 0, so if you needed to type this in the calculator right now, you could. But I can see that because this is squared, that means this is going to be a quadratic. Which if you were to type this in the calculator, you would notice that this is a parabola. Number 2, or B, you can see that this is in the form of y equals mx plus b, which means that this is linear. If you were to type that in the calculator, you would see that that would be a straight line. Okay, C, we can't type this in the calculator yet because everything's not on the same side. If you want to subtract the 2x and move it over to the other side, you can type it in the calculator. But if you can just see that because this is cubed, that means it's not linear, it's not quadratic. We're just going to say that this is neither. But you can eventually type that in the calculator. You just can't yet because it's not equal to 0. All right, number 2, what are the values of a, b, and c in the following quadratic equation? So what you have to notice about this first is that it's not equal to 0. So before you can label a, b, and c, you have to get it all on the same side and equal to 0. Also notice that you have your x before you have your x squared, which is also wrong. So there's a couple of things we need to change about this before we can label a, b, and c. So I'm going to subtract this 6 and move it to the other side. When I do that, I'm going to go ahead and just rewrite this in the correct order. So I'm going to put my x squared first, then my minus x. Make sure you keep that negative sign with the x. And then I have minus 6 equals the number. So notice again, I've got my x squared, and then I have my x, and then I have my number. That's going to be important for when you label your a, b, and c. So we saw this when we did factoring, but our a is in front of x squared. Our b is in front of the x, and our c is our constant. So what number is in front of x squared? That would just be 1. In front of b is going to be -1, and the c is going to be -6. But it's important that you realize you can't label a, b, and c until that is all equal to 0. Number 3, name all the terms synonymous to the term solution when solving the quadratic equation. So there's 4 words that all mean the same thing. Okay, obviously it's asking what else means the same thing as solution. So we've got solution. You also have to know that this is the same thing as roots, which is also the same thing as zeros, which is also the same thing as an x-intercept. Okay, all of these mean the same thing, so we should be able to ask you to find any of these, and you have to realize they're all the same thing. Now, this isn't just for a quadratic. So yeah, for a quadratic, your solutions are your zeros, it's your x-intercepts, where it crosses the x-axis. But the same thing goes even if it's a line. We talked about zeros as lines. It's the same thing. A 0 is going to be your x-intercept. It's just with quadratics, we have 2 of them. So you got to know all those words. Make sure you understand it's an x-intercept and not a y-intercept. Don't get those 2 things confused. Okay, number 4. What is the first step in finding the solutions to the following quadratic equation? So after we did all those word problems, a lot of you would probably go straight into trying to FOIL this. The problem is that would just be a lot more work than you need to do, because if you notice, this is actually already equal to 0, which means it's like it's already factored. So if those are your factors, all you would need to do is set each one of those factors equal to 0. So yes, if it was equal to some other number besides 0, you would have to FOIL. But because it's already equal to 0, you can just set those factors equal to 0 from the start. Which leads us into number 5, which is basically that same, or it is the same question. And it's asking me to find the solutions. Okay, So because this is already equal to 0, I can go ahead and set my factors equal to 0. Now I actually have 3 factors here. I have the 3, I have h plus 6, and I have 2h minus 7. If I take that 3 and set it equal to 0, I don't even have a variable, which means that is not going to be one of my solutions. It is a factor, it is not a solution. Now I'm going to take h plus 6, set it equal to 0, and 2h minus 7, and set it equal to 0 to find my other 2 solutions. So in h plus 6, I'm going to subtract 6, so that gets me a solution of negative 6. On this other factor, I'm going to add 7. So I have 2h equals 7, divide by 2, and so h equals 7 over 2. Alright, so these are also, if we were to graph this would be our x-intercepts. We'll see that a little bit more when we get into graphing. But yes, these are solutions, zeros, roots, x-intercepts. All mean the same thing. Okay, number 6. So number 6, now you see this says f of x. Remember that means y. In this case, you can kind of also think about it meaning equal to 0. Since everything's on the same side, that kind of sets this up for us to go ahead and get started. So this one, I'm going to factor this. Okay, remember the first step of factoring is to take out your GCF. So I have a GCF of 2. I'm going to take that 2 out. That leaves me with g squared minus 7g plus 10, and that's all equal to 0. So now I'm going to factor this. So what multiplies to be 10 and also adds up to be negative 7. I know some of y'all make a t-chart. Okay, so you have to understand that you need 2 negative numbers here. So it's going to be negative 2 and negative 5. So it's multiply to be 10 and add to be negative 7. So I'm going to break my middle term apart into a minus 2g, a minus 5g. I'm going to bring my first term down, and I'm going to bring my last term down. This is all still equal to 0. Now we have our 4 terms, so we can group. My first group, I can take out a g. If I take that out, that leaves me with g minus 2. My second group, I can take out a negative 5, and that leaves me with g minus 2. So my factors here are going to be g minus 2 and g minus 5. Now realize that these are my factors. Those are not my solutions. I still have to find my solutions. So I'm going to have g minus 2 equals 0 and g minus 5 equals 0. This first one I'm going to add 2 to both sides. So that gives me g equals 2. Over here I'm going to add 5 to both sides. And that gives me g equals 5. You can either leave your answers separate like that, or if you want to list them, you can. So you could say g equals 2, 5, if you wanted to write them that way. Alright, number 7, calculate the roots. Again, this is just asking the same thing. We need to find our zeros, our solutions, our x-intercepts. Before I can do that, I have to get this equal to 0. So minus 3. So I have 6g squared plus 7g minus 3 equals 0. I don't have a GCF, so I'm going to do what multiplies to be negative 18 and adds to be 7. That's going to end up being 9 and negative 2. So I'm going to break my middle term apart into a plus 9g, a minus 2g, bring my first term down, bring my last term down. And now I'm going to group. My first group has a 3g in common. If I take that out, that leaves me with 2g plus 3. My second group, I don't see anything they have in common, which means I need to bring out a 1. Really, it's a negative 1. And that leaves me with 2g plus 3. So my 2 factors are 3g minus 1 and 2g plus 3. And I still need to find my roots, my solutions. So I'm going to have 3g minus 1 equals 0 and 2g plus 3 equals 0. The only difference between this and what we did on the last test is that we have to set these equal to 0. I'm going to add 1. So my first solution is going to be 1/3. Over here I'm going to subtract 3. Divide by 2. So I get negative 3 over 2. And those are my two solutions. All right, number 8. I'm going to delete this so I have more room. Number 8, compute the x-intercept. So again, I'm finding solutions, roots, zeros, all mean the same thing here. There's a couple different ways you can work this problem. You could do it by factoring, which means you would have to subtract the 245. I think it's easier just to solve for x on this problem. So what I would do here is divide both sides by 5. So I have x squared equals 49. I'm still trying to find x, so I have to remove the square, which means I need to take the square root. Here's the part that a lot of people miss on this. The square root of 49, yes, is positive 7, but it is also negative 7. You have two solutions, okay? Because you have to think, what does taking the square root mean? We're trying to figure out what times itself got 49. Well, 7 times 7 is 49, but also negative 7 times negative 7 is 49. So you have to make sure and get both answers there, or you'll get that one wrong. You can either write it like that, as plus or minus 7, or you can list it as 7 and negative 7, or you can write it separately as x equals 7, x equals negative 7. But you have to have both answers. All right, number 9. So I need to factor this. It's already equal to 0, so I'm first going to look for a GCF. Okay, and it says solve for x. Really, that should really say solve for y. But I do have a GCF here. They 4 and y go into both of these. So I'm going to take 4y out. That leaves me with y plus 2 equals 0. Now notice, we don't even have any squareds anymore, which means this is factored. Okay, so what I need to do is take each one of these factors and set them equal to 0. So I'm going to have 4y equals 0 and y plus 2 equals 0. So this first one, I'm going to divide both sides by 4. So y is equal to 0. And over here, I'm going to subtract 2. So y equals negative 2. This is one of the easier ones because we don't have to go into the whole long factoring process because after we took the GCF out, we didn't even have any squares left. Okay, number 10, I'm first going to look for a GCF. There's not one. So I have to factor this. Okay, well I can't really work this one like number 8. It's not going to come out to be nice. Well, actually, we could, or you can do a difference of squares. So let's try it like we worked number 8. Okay, so let's add 81 to both sides. So that's going to be 49x squared equals 81. I'm going to divide both sides by 49. So that's going to be x squared equals, I'm going to see if 81 over 49 goes down anymore. So 81 divided by 49. Okay, I don't want the decimal, so math, enter. And that stays as 81 over 49. Now I'm going to take the square root of both sides. Okay, and so you can actually type this in the calculator as the square root of 81 divided by 49. Okay, it's going to give you a gross number. You need to get it to a fraction. So math, enter. The problem with this one is, so it's 9 over 7, but what you can't forget is that not only is it positive 9 over 7, but it's also negative 9 over 7. So that is one way to work this one. I'm going to go ahead and show you all the other way. So I'm going to clear this. Okay, this is a difference of squares if you can remember those from the unit before. So if I factor this, I already know one of these is going to be plus and one's going to be minus. So now I think, what times itself gets me 49? Okay, that'll be 7. What times itself gets me x squared? That'll be x. And what times itself gets me 81? That's 9. So here's my two factors, 7x plus 9, 7x minus 9. If I take both of those and I set them equal to 0, what you will end up seeing is we get those same two answers. We get negative 9 over 7, and we get positive 9 over 7. So you get the same two answers either way. It just depends on you. Do you know difference of squares better, or can you do it the other way? But if you do it the other way, you have to remember both the positive and the negative answer. All right, number 11. So this says, use words to describe each step taken below to solve the equation by completing the square. All right, so we're getting into completing the square here. All right, so we start with that equation. Okay, and so we have the original equation. What would we do next? Okay, the next thing we would have to do is get our constants isolated on the right side, which means we had to subtract 12. So that's what happened first. We subtract 12. Okay, now we would have to figure out what number would we use to complete the square. I like to put boxes in there. I don't know how your teacher likes to do it. But you had to figure out what needed to complete the square. So what you had to do was cut your b in half, so negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3, and square it, which is where the 9 comes from. So we're going to add 9. Okay, the next thing that you have to do is you have to factor. Okay, we had to factor the left side. It's a perfect square trinomial, which means you can use the shortcut. You take your b, you divide it by 2, and that is going to be your factor. So negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3, so that is our factor, x minus 3 squared. Okay, so after I factored that, I now have x minus 3 squared equals 16. Now I need to undo the square, which means I need to take the square root. So that's what the next step is, take the square root. After you take the square root, you're left with x minus 3 equals, the square root of 16 is positive and negative 4, so plus or minus 4. All right, then to find x, we would end up adding 3 to both sides. Okay, so that's the next step, add 3. Okay, I'm going to separate this. I told my class that I don't have to necessarily see these two things written out. I'm okay with you doing 3 plus 4, which is 7. Okay, but I'm going to go ahead and write to separate. But you have to do 3 plus 4 to get 7, and you need to do 3 minus 4 to get negative 1. So you get your answers of 7 and negative 1. We're not going to ask y'all to write every single step on the test, but you do need to know how to complete the square. Number 12, solve each equation by completing the square. All right, so here we go. So I need to get my constants isolated on the right side. So I'm going to subtract 6 first. That leaves me with k squared minus 8k. I'm going to leave a square equals 54 minus 6 is 48. And then I'm going to leave another box, another square. Now I need to figure out what number is going to complete that square. So you take your b, you cut it in half, and then you square it. So negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. Negative 4 squared is a positive 16. Remember, what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. Now I'm going to factor the left side. It is a perfect square trinomial. That's what we just made it into, so it's easy to factor. So you take your b, you cut it in half, and that's my factor. So it's going to be k minus 4 squared equals 48 plus 16 is 64. Okay, now I'm still trying to find x, or k. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. That's going to leave me with k minus 4 on the left side, and then the square root of 64 is positive and negative 8. I'm going to add 4 to both sides. So I have k equals 4 plus or minus 8. So to get my two answers, I'm going to do 4 plus 8, which is 12, 4 minus 8, which is negative 4. And those are my two answers. Okay. Number 13. First thing I need to do is get my 26 to the other side. If we were factoring this, we could factor it from right here because it's equal to 0, but that's not how we complete this square. So I'm going to have n squared minus 12m. I'm going to have a box equals negative 26 and then another box. So I need to figure out what's going to complete that square. So I'm going to divide that number by 2. So negative 12 divided by 2 is negative 6. Negative 6 squared is 36. Now I'm going to factor this left side. It is a perfect square trinomial. Take your b, cut it in half. That's your factor. So I'm going to have m minus 6 squared equals negative 26 plus 36 is 10. I'm going to take the square root because I need to find m. That's going to leave me with m minus 6 equals, I do not know the square root of 10. It is not a nice number. I could type it in my calculator, but that wouldn't be exact. So I'm going to leave this as plus or minus the square root of 10 instead of having to round. Now I'm going to add 6 to both sides. So I have m equals 6 plus or minus the square root of 10. And I think most of the teachers are okay with y'all leaving it like this if it does end up being an answer with a square root in it. Number 14, solve using the quadratic formula. It says to put your answers in radical and decimal form. So we're going to have 2 different answers on these. All right, so before you can label your A, B, and C on these, you have to make sure it's all on the same side, that it's all equal to 0. Number 14 is. So what I like to do is I want to go A equals, B equals, and C equals. And then I'll plug it into my formula. So A is in front of x squared, which means that's 2. B is in front of x, which is negative 5. And C is negative 12, the number by itself. All right, so my formula is the opposite of B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. So I'm going to plug in everything that I know into this formula. So the opposite of B, that would be 5 plus or minus the square root of B squared. Make sure you put this in parentheses right here, you will get it wrong. So negative 5 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 12 all over 2 times A, which is 2. So when we say we want this answer to be in radical form, that means we want you to simplify everything that you can, everything under the radical. Okay, so if I were to now simplify this one more step, I'm going to have 5 plus or minus. Now here's what I would do if it were me. I would type everything under the radical in my calculator. So I'm going to go in my calculator, and I'm just going to type, I'm not going to type the radical in, I'm just going to type everything underneath it in. So it would be negative 5 squared minus 4 times A, which is 2, times C, which is negative 12, which is 121. So that's going to be 121 under there, and then I'm going to have 4 on the bottom. So when we ask you to leave it in radical form, that would be the answer. Okay, but if we want our actual decimal answers, you're going to go to your calculator. I'm going to clear out what's in there. Now what's nice about these is that you can pull up the fraction in the calculator and you can kind of type this all in at once. So if you hit alpha y equals and enter, you can get your fraction up. So now I'm just going to type in what I had after I simplified it. So 5 plus the square root of 121, and then just use your down arrow and put your 4. Now you can type everything in from the very beginning if you wanted to check it that way to make sure your 121 is right. So one of our answers is going to be 4, so x equals 4. That was with the plus sign, now I need the minus. So we taught y'all in class when we put these in the calculator. You can go up to it, you can enter it again, and then you can just go change your plus sign to a minus sign, and you don't have to retype everything. So you just type over a minus sign, and then our other answer will be negative 3 over 2. What's nice about doing it in the fraction like that is that if your answer is a fraction, it'll give it to you that way. It won't give it to you as a decimal. All right, so there we go. There's our 2 answers for 14. Number 15. So I'm going to clear that so I have more room. All right, so 15. I need to get all of this on the same side first. So I'm going to subtract 10x squared So I have, actually X that. Redo. Okay, I actually need to keep my x squared positive. So if that's the case, I need to actually move my 7x squared to the other side so I can keep it positive. I'm going to subtract my 3x and move it to the other side, and I'm going to subtract my 15 and move it to the other side. So I'm just moving everything to the other side. So what I have now, so 10x squared minus 7x squared, that's 3x squared, minus 3x minus 15 equals 0. All right, so now I'm going to label my A, B, and C. So somewhere, I promise this is helpful, you have your A, B, and C written down. So A is 3, B is negative 3, C is negative 15. And I'm going to plug this into the quadratic formula. So I have the opposite of B, so that's 3, plus or minus the square root of B squared, so that's negative 3 squared, minus 4 times A, which is 3, times C, which is negative 15, all over 2 times 3. Again, we need your answer 2 different ways on this one, and we need you to simplify the radical and then to get your decimal answers. So I'm going to have 3 plus or minus the square root. I'm going to type everything under the square root in the calculator so I don't have to do it by hand. So this is going to be negative 3 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 15, which comes out to be 189. So if we ask you for your exact answer, your radical answer, this would be it. X equals this stuff. Okay, but if we want your decimal answers, we are now going to go back to our calculator. You can hit alpha, y equals, and enter, and that'll get you your fraction up. And I'm going to type all of this in. So I'll have 3 plus the square root of 189, and then on the bottom I will have the 6. Okay, so there's one of my decimal answers. If I round that, I just round it to the hundredth, so I'm going to do just 2.79. Now I need to get my other answer. Be careful here. This does not mean your other answer is going to be negative 2.79. So I'm going to re-enter this, and I'm going to go change my plus sign to a minus sign, and that'll be negative 1.79. So those are my 2 decimal answers. We won't ask you for both answers on all of them. We may ask you just for one or the other, so you need to know how to find both. All right, number 16. First I need to get this equal to 0, so I need to add the m and move it over. Make sure when you move that over that you put these things in the right order. So it's got to be your m squared, and then your m, and then your 7, or else your A, B, and C are going to be wrong. So here my A is 10, B is going to be 1, and C is 7. I'm going to plug this into quadratic formula. So I need the opposite of B, which is negative 1, plus or minus the square root of B squared. So 1 squared minus 4 times 10 times 7. All over 2a, so 2 times 10. Okay, so now I'm going to simplify everything under the radical. Okay, just to save some time, I'm going to tell you, never mind, I don't have that in front of me. So, I'm going to go ahead and type that stuff in my calculator. So that's going to be 1 squared minus 4 times 10 times 70. So under the radical, we're going to have negative, I just put 70, I meant 7. Okay, try that again. 1 squared minus 4 times 10 times 7, which is negative 279. So if we ask for radical form, that's what we're asking for. Now here's what's going to happen. You try to type this in the calculator, it's going to give you an error. That is because you cannot take the square root of a negative number. So my answer here would be no solution. So think about this. Think about what a solution means. Those are x-intercepts. If this does not have any x-intercepts, then there is no solution. All right, number 17. we're going to talk about the discriminant. So what does the discriminant tell you? It tells you how many solutions you have. Okay, how do you find the discriminant? You do b squared minus 4ac. It's everything under the square root in the quadratic formula, but it's not the square root. It's just everything under the square root. So b squared minus 4ac. What do you know if the discriminant is negative? Well, let's think about that. Look on this last problem. Our discriminant on this last problem would have been negative. And what was our answer? Our answer was no solution. So if it's negative, it's no solution. That's because you can't take the square root of a negative number. What do you know if the discriminant is positive? If it comes out to be positive, which it did on number 15, under the square root we had 189, we ended up with 2 answers. So you're going to have 2 solutions if it is positive. And if the discriminant is 0, you're only going to have 1 solution. Remember, a solution is an x-intercept. All right, 18 through 20. State the value of the discriminant for each equation and then determine the number of real solutions for the equation. All right, so here we go. I need to get this equal to 0 before I can label my a, b, and c. So 3x squared minus x minus 8 equals 0. So here my a is 3, b is negative 1, and c is negative 8. All I have to do is plug into b squared minus 4ac. So it's going to be negative 1 squared minus 4 times a is 3 times c is negative 8. And I'm going to type that in my calculator, but I'm just going to tell y'all what it is. Okay, if I type that in, my discriminant ends up being 97. Because that is positive, that means I would have 2 solutions. All that is asking. Okay, number 19. I'm going to add 16 to both sides. I've got to get it all equal to 0 first. So 9x squared plus 24x plus 16 equals 0. So here my a is 9, b is 24, c is 16. If I plug this into b squared minus 4ac, that's going to be 24 squared minus 4 times 9 times c. If I type that in the calculator, I actually get 0. It doesn't look like it, but we would. If my discriminant is 0, that means I have 1 solution. All right, number 20. All right, this is all equal to 0, so my a is 1, b is negative 9, c is 21. So b squared, that's going to be negative 9 squared minus 4 times 1 times 21. If I type this in the calculator, I get negative 3. Think about the quadratic formula. If my discriminant is negative 3, I can't take the square root of a negative number, which means my solution would be no solution. All right, number 21. I'm missing number 21. All right, number 21. Greta Greenthumb is planting a small vegetable garden which will have an area of 80 square feet. Its length is 2 feet more than its width. Find the dimensions. All right, here we go. So we have this garden. The area of it is 80. It says the length is 2 feet more than the width, but you don't know the width. So we're going to call that W. And the length is 2 feet more than the width. So that's going to be W plus 2. Find the dimensions. All right, so area of a rectangle is length times width. I'm going to plug in everything that I know. So I know my area is 80. My length, we'll just call that W times W plus 2. I'm going to start working this out. So W times W is W squared. W times 2 is 2W. Before I can factor this, I'm going to subtract 80 from both sides. I'm just going to throw that down there at the end. So now I need 2 factors that multiply to be negative 80 and add up to be 2. That is going to be 10 and negative 8. So now I'm going to start factoring this. I'm going to break this into a 10W and a minus 8W. Bring your first term down, bring your last term down. And now I'm going to group. My first group, if I'm going too fast, just pause it. So my first group has a W in common. That leaves me with W plus 10 My second group has a negative 8 in common. That leaves me with w plus 10. So my two factors here are w minus 8, w plus 10. These are my factors. I need to find solutions. Now what you can do on these measurement problems is figure out which one of these is going to get you the positive solution, right? If I solve w minus 8 and I add a to both sides, that's going to get me my positive solution. If I solve the other one, it's going to get me a negative number, which for a measurement problem is not going to help us. So now I go back to the question. Find the dimensions of the garden. Well, I figured out that the width is 8, and to get the length, 8 plus 2, that would be 10. So 8 and 10. 22, determine the dimensions of the triangle. It has an area of 30. All right, so here we go. So area of a triangle is 1/2 base times height. So my area is 30. I'm going to have 1/2. My base is x. My height is x plus 17. Okay, and it tells you a hint to multiply by 2 before factoring. Okay, I also need to go ahead and distribute that x. Okay, so I'm going to leave the 1/2 for right now. So 1/2, I'm going to have x squared plus 17x. To get rid of that 1/2, you're going to have to multiply both sides by 2. Make sure that you realize that 2 is just canceling out the 1/2. The 2 doesn't actually go inside the parentheses. So now I have 60 equals x squared plus 17x. I need to get the 60 to the other side, so I'm going to subtract it. Just going to throw it down there at the end. Okay, now if you need a review on factoring, make sure you know how to factor this, but if you want to pause it and factor it, but to save time, I'm just going to give you the factors. So the factors are x plus 20 and x minus 3 equals 0. Which one of these is going to get you the positive solution? That would be x minus 3, because if you add 3 to both sides, x will be 3. So when this says, when it asks for the equation, my equation is x squared plus 17x minus 60 equals 0. We just found x was 3, which if you look at the picture, that's x is my base. So that's 3. And then if you look at the picture, our height is x plus 17, so that's 3 plus 17, which is 20. You can check these very easily. Plug it back into the formula. 20 times 3 is 60, divided by 2 is 30. That was our area. Number 23, determine the dimensions of the rectangle if the area is 132. Okay, this one actually requires the most amount of work. So I'm going to have w plus 4 times 2w minus 5 equals 132. So I'm going to have to start FOILing this. So I have 2w squared minus 5w plus 8w minus 20 equals 132. I'm going to do a couple of steps into one here. I'm going to combine my like terms. So negative 5w plus 8w is 3w. And I'm going to go ahead and subtract this 132 because I'm going to have to get it equal to 0. When I subtract that, I'm going to end up with minus 152. Okay, now again, to save time, I am going to give you the factors, but normally you would have to go through the process of grouping and doing all the factoring here. But I'm going to just give you the factors, which are going to be w minus 8 and 2w plus 19. Okay, which one of these is going to get us the positive answer? It would be the w minus 8. So if I do set w minus 8 equal to 0, now add 8 to both sides, my width is 8. So this does say to find the dimensions. So I'm just going to take that 8 and plug it in. So I have 8 plus 4 at the top here, which is 12. And then here I'm going to do 2 times 8 minus 5. So 2 times 8 is 16, minus 5 is 11. Very easy to check because 12 times 11 is 132. Number 24, a number subtracted from its square is 110. Compute both possible answers. So a number, which we don't know is x, from subtracted from its square, so that's going to be coming from x squared, is 110. Before we can factor this, we've got to move the 110 over. So I'm going to subtract that. Okay, again, to save time, I'm going to give you the factors here, but you do have to know how to factor for the test. Okay, so my factors here end up being x minus 11 and x plus 10. Notice in this case, I'm not talking about measurements, so I do need both solutions here. So I'm going to set x minus 11 equal to 0 and x plus 10 equal to 0. Here I'm going to add 11 to both sides. So that's x equals 11. Here I'm going to subtract 10 from both sides. So that's negative 10. So those are my two solutions, are negative 10 and 11. Number 25, a rectangle. So I have a rectangle with an area of 24 square units, has a length of x plus 1 and a width of 4x minus 6. We need to get the value of x. So I have x plus 1, length times width. So x plus 1 times 4x minus 6 equals 24. Okay, I'm just going to tell y'all what this would be FOILed. So it would be 4x squared minus 2x minus 6 after we FOIL that and combine like terms. I'm going to have to subtract the 24 to get it equal to 0. So this is 4x squared minus 2x minus 30 equals 0. Now this does have a GCF, so I would have to take that out. So I would take the 2 out. That leaves me with 2x squared minus x minus 15 equals 0. Again, to save time, I'm just going to give you the factors here. So the factors here would be x minus 3 and 2x plus 5. Okay, which one of these is going to get us our positive solution? Because again, we are talking about measurements. That would be the x minus 3. So if I add 3 to both sides, x is going to be 3. So what is it? The question says calculate the value of x. So there we go, we found x. We don't even have to plug it back in. Okay, through 26 through 27, it says to find the quotient. Okay, the hint is factor the numerator. A lot of y'all missed this on the last test. You have to factor the top. Okay, I'm going to save some time and just give you what the factors would be here. But you would have to go into the grouping and all of that, get your factors, and that's going to go down to k minus 8 and k plus 3. And I'm dividing by k minus 8. And what you notice here is that those k minus 8s are going to cancel. And so I am left with k plus 3. But you have to know how to factor the top. Number 27, the same thing. Okay, you would need to factor the top. Okay, so you'd have to go through the long process of that. When you do factor, you end up with y plus 2 and y minus 6. And if I divide by y plus 2, those are going to cancel, and I'm left with y minus 6 as my answer. Make sure you know how to do those, because you will see one of those again. All right, the last ones will go very fast. All right, factor. All right, see how messy this looks? That means we're just going to need to take out a GCF and write what's left. So we need to see what all of these have in common. The biggest number that they all have in common is 2. Now I need to look at the x's. They all at least have one x. And then with the y's, the most they have is just a y. So I'm going to take out 2xy, and then I would write down what's left. So I would be left with 3x plus, let's see, 7y minus 21, and then minus xy. You need to pause that to go through each term slowly, then do that. 29, find the range of the function. All right, so range means y, domain means x. All right, so all of these values here, these are all x values. What I'm going to do, since that is in y equals, I'm going to go to my calculator and type that in my y equals. I'm going to go to my y equals, clear out whatever's in there, and I'm going to type in negative 3x squared plus 2. Really, if you do this any other way, like if you take those numbers and plug them in, not only are you doing it the long way, but you're probably going to get something wrong. So from here, I'm going to pull up the table, and I'm going to look and see, all right, when x is negative 2, what is y? All right, so when x is negative 2, y is negative 10. When x is negative 1, y is negative 1. When x is 0, y is 2. When x is 1, y is negative 1. And when x is 2, y is negative 10. So that is my range. Number 30, what is the degree? All right, so quick recap through degree. I'm going to look at each monomial individually. So the degree of this first term is 1, the degree of the second term is 2, and the degree of the last term is 0. Whatever the highest number in between those is, that is the degree of the whole thing, which means my degree here is 2. Looking at B, again, I look at each monomial individually. So -2, that degree is 0. The degree of 3x cubed is 3. And the highest number between those two is 3. All right, looking at C, the degree of this first term is 4. The degree of the second term is 3. 2, 1, 0. What is the highest between all of those? That is 4. 31, find the difference. All right, so a lot of y'all missed this when we tested over this. You're going to have to distribute that minus sign. Okay, so I have 3x squared minus 4x plus 1, and I need to distribute the minus sign. So I have minus 8x squared plus 4x minus 17. Now when you distribute that minus sign, you're done with the parentheses. Now I'm going to combine my like terms. So I have 3x squared minus 8x squared, that's negative 5x squared. Negative 4x plus 4x, those cancel out. And then I have 1 minus 17, which is minus 16. And that is my answer. Number 32, find the product. So I need to multiply 2 times 3 times 10. So that would be 60. Now when multiplying, what do we do with exponents? We add them. So I'm going to look at my x's. I have x cubed, x squared, x to the 1. So 3, 2, and 1, that's going to be x to the 6th. Now I'm going to look at my y's. I have y squared, y to the 1, and y to the 1. So 2, 1, 1, that's going to be y to the 4th. And then I'm going to look at my z's. I have z to the 1 and z to the 1. Oh, and z to the 3. I missed that one. So 1, 3, and 1, that'll be z to the 5th. That's all you have to do there. All right, number 33. The area of a rectangle is that. Find the length if the width is 2x. We're going to take that, divide it. So 2x to the 5th over 2x, I'm going to subtract these exponents. So that's going to be x to the 4th plus 16 divided by 2. We're going to divide these like this. 16 divided by 2 is 8. Subtract your exponents, so x squared. And then 12 divided by 2 is 6. And then those x's are going to cancel out. Last one, 34. Right, oh no, not the last one, just kidding. Write the direct variation equations. That's y equals kx. You have to know that, it's not on the formula chart. We're going to plug in everything that we know. So what is the value of x when k is 42 and y is 12? So I'm going to say 12 is y, k is 42, and I don't know x. So to get x, I'm going to divide by 42. And if I type 12 divided by 42 in the calculator, it is 2 over 7. 35, which equation represents a line that fits the data? So we have the number of members and the profit. Okay, so what I would do here, I would try to find a couple of points that are semi-pretty to where you know what the ordered pair would be. It looks like this one here at 6,300 is fairly pretty, and this one at 2,700 is fairly pretty. You can either do rise over run, or you can write these points down. I'm just going to do rise over run. So from 300 up to 700, that's a jump of 400. And then I would be running from 6 to 20, which would be a run of 14. So if I do 400 divided by 14, math, enter, enter, that gets me 200 over 7. What was that as a decimal? That was 28.5, which rounds to 29. So my slope here, my goodness, my slope here would be 29. So my slope would be, that would be A. Okay, if you drew a line of best fit, our y-intercept would be right there at about 180. Now the last one, 36. Solve the equation 4 to the x equals 256. You're just going to have to guess and check your way to this. So I'm going to go to my calculator and I'm going to say, all right, 4 to the 3rd power. Is that 256? No. So I'm going to try 4 to the 4th power. All right, that's 256. So in this case, x is 4. Just trying to figure out what exponent that needs to be. All right, this is a lot of stuff. Or it's not that it's a lot, it just takes a long time. So make sure you can be as efficient as possible when doing these.